In this video, we're going to look at door catalogs. So if I click on the door menu, the door catalogs are going to be shown in this drop down right here. So in the ProPath section early on in this course, we actually added a new catalog called our company name, or for me, Cabinet Explorer. So should I keep the door and the stock catalog? And what other uses are there for door catalog? Well, for me, as you've probably learned to know, I like to delete things, so I'm going to get rid of stock. And if I wanted to, I could hang on to door so that I could use this as a reference. But in reality, I can recreate any one of these doors in 5 to 10 seconds anyways. So for myself, I would probably delete it. But if you're new to this and you want to hang on to it and kind of get some ideas off of it, you can keep that. But I do like the idea of creating a new catalog and then defining the categories for that catalog. Now, what are some other ways we could use catalogs? If you sometimes build your own doors and sometimes you outsource it, technically you could create a separate door catalog. You could have one for outsourced doors and one for in-house doors. Or maybe you buy from multiple suppliers and the doors are called different names. That would be another example. You could just create a whole new catalog for each vendor. Now, for the most part, unless you have a lot of different vendors happening, I would just create one for your company name and just lump everything together. But that's kind of some of the example uses that happen. Now, there's not a whole lot of controls that we can use here, but with our catalog selected, we can go to catalog properties and we can rename and set the defaults for new doors. And it's important to note this won't impact any of our already created doors. So for example, if I go to my solid doors and look at this shaker door, it's currently at 2 3/4. But even if I change my defaults to 2 1/2, this shaker door will still be 2 3/4 because that's how it was created. Now, I would still highly recommend setting this up with the defaults of your most common doors, because what this does is whenever I go in to create a new door, I'll just say test and make it a multi-piece. Here's where this comes into play. Now it's choosing flat panel, a 1/4 inch panel inset, and 2 1/2 inch stiles. And so where did that come from? That come from this section right here. We picked flat panel, 1/4 inch panel inset, and our 2 1/2 style and rails. A little bit of a time saver, but obviously each door can be overridden by going into design and changing it individually. So the catalog properties are just a shortcut. In this video, we're going to look at organizing the door folders. So just like the material library, as you get more and more doors, it's helpful to make sure you stay on top of your folders. So my personal preference is, like I have it laid out, I keep my solid doors or my 5-piece doors in one section, and then I keep my slab in another section. Now, you might find yourself creating more and more options. Like, for example, if you start doing routed MDF doors, maybe you want to keep that separate from just your normal plywood slab. So you could either create a whole new parent category, such as, just call it routed slab, and I could move that over as its own category. And now I have 3 main things, and then I could put doors and door fronts underneath it by simply adding folders. So that's one option. Or I could kind of stick with this same solid or slab option. And when I say solid, it means like a 5-piece or a multi-piece door. And when I say a slab, it's similar to like in-house or CNC cut doors. So let's say I want to nest the routed slab underneath there. I could just use the arrows to move it under. And there's more things that I want to eventually build out, like I want to put glass doors in here, so I could make a folder for that. Then move that down here. Or maybe I wouldn't have to put doors on, I could just say glass, but you get the idea. Just create folders, get familiar with moving them around and organizing things however it makes sense for your shop or for the vendor that you're using. So most of the time when we create a new door, our strategy is going to be find the closest door that we can and copy from it. But just to prove that it's super simple to recreate these from scratch, in this video we're going to be making a brand new door without copying another one. So let's click new, and I'm going to call this Myron's 5-piece door. I don't really care about descriptions unless you have specialized reports that use these. These are just for your reference. Slab is exactly what it sounds like. It's a 1-piece, either on the CNC or a solid outsourced slab. Multi-piece is your 5-piece doors or multiple piece doors. And then template is for like MDF doors, where you can assign tools and tool sets to machine a 1-piece MDF door. We're going to talk about those later. So for now, I'm doing a 5-piece door, if I can spell correctly. There we go, 5-piece door, so I want it on multi-piece. I'll come back and add a slab here in a minute. And tags are really useful in UCSs, and I'll probably talk a little bit about that in the UCS section. But rather than calling out individual door names, like if I want a UCS that runs on all MDF doors, I might put a tag here called MDF, and then in the UCS I could say, if the tag equals MDF, then do this. But like I said, that's a more advanced topic, so I'll leave tags blank for now. If I type something in the notes, this will automatically populate the door notes on the report. So be careful with this field, because depending on what door report you're using, if you put a comment here, it will show on every line of every door. But it can be a useful way to store information if something does need to be noted on the door. And then we have design, door, or door front. And I've never really figured out exactly what this does. I'm pretty sure it's literally just the visual, like as far as making it this rectangle shape or making it look more like a door front. And to be honest, we can change all that later. So I don't think this is really too critical, but if you're creating a new one, obviously pick the right one. So let's click next. And here's our defaults from our catalog properties that we talked about a couple videos ago. And let's hit finish. Okay, now that's how we create a door. And that was easy, but we really haven't done anything yet. So let's go a little deeper inside the door. We can see all these same fields that we had here, and we can assign edge banding if required. We can tell it which edges get profiles, which normally we'd want all doors to get outside edges, so I'll leave that. And then we can choose our default profiles. So say you have a shaker door and you want it to default to a shaker edge, you could choose this. Otherwise, it's just going to default to a random one. So that's the options here in this column. Now across the top, we have door associations, which I'm going to cover in a separate video, so I'm going to skip over that. Then we have material filters. And so if I click on this, we can see all of our materials for doors. And this is material schedules, not materials. So I currently have two. I have a cherry 5-piece and a cherry slab. So if I want any door schedule to work, I should leave it exactly as it is. There's no material schedule specified on the right side. If I want to filter that down, I could pull just the 5-piece over, and that's saying this is the only thing that's allowed to work on this door. I'm a big fan of setting this up. It is a little bit more work because you have to maintain this as you add more and more material schedules, but I think it's nice just to prevent someone from selecting the wrong thing. So again, with nothing over here on the right, the entire list will load. Like every door material schedule will load when you go to select this door. If I pull this over, it will be just this door. So to illustrate that farther, what we're talking about is if I go to New Job, and go to Cabinet, Doors, switch to the Cabinet Explorer catalog, and choose Myron 5-piece door. And we only have one option here because we pulled this over and we're saying only this is allowed to work. Back in the door editor, if I go to Doors and back into my door, so now we know how material filters work. Profiles are exactly the same idea. If there's certain edges that are allowed on this door, I would pull just those edges over. And so the same way, when I go to start a new job, right now, if I leave it like it is, only 3/8 lip and bevel would show, and I would not see any of these. If I leave everything unselected, it will load the whole list. So again, it's kind of up to you on if you like the idea of a condensed list for the people creating new jobs, or if you want to cut back on the maintenance required and the upkeep required, you can just leave nothing selected and let everything load. And the last option up here is design. Click this, and this pulls in our door editor. So again, it used our catalog defaults for stiles and rails, which is 2.5, but I can easily change this. So say I'm doing a huge 5-piece door with 5-inch rails, I would just highlight each rail and type in the keyboard. So it knows, all I have to do is start typing and it knows to put it up here in the style width. So that's easy enough. The other option we have when we highlight a style or rail is we can adjust the length. So if we want to oversize our parts on the cut list, I could put an inch here. And now instead of a 30-inch board like the door is showing, it would report as a 31-inch style. So that can come in handy depending on the type of joint you're using, but there's a couple different ways to get that to oversize. But those are the two options we have, size and length adjustment. Now the other thing we can do is we can highlight the panel and we can change the type of panel. So we can have a flat panel or a raised panel. And the reason this is a different option is because if we go back to our material schedule and go to door material schedules, you'll notice that raised panel is different than flat panel. It might be using the same material, but more than likely it's a totally different material that's assigned to it. So Cabinet Vision will need to know what type of panel that door has. And so a lot of people will create a door folder called flat panel doors and another one called raised panel doors. And the reason for that is it's not easy to try to make one door style try to be flat panel and raised panel. It needs to be a whole different door style in Cabinet Vision. So it's important to think about as we're organizing our catalog, if I have a shaker door, that is always going to be flat panel. Or if I have a raised panel door, there's not an easy way to get rid of that, because even if I would get rid of the profile on the raised panel door, it would still be using the raised panel material. So something to be mindful of. Back into our catalog. If I select my panel again, now we understand flat and raised. We also have glass and horizontal and vertical slats. And that essentially means individual boards whenever I do the slats. I think there's better ways to do like a V-grooving type of panel. You can do that through the UCS. So very, very seldom do I actually use this horizontal slats and vertical slats. If you simply need a visual, it can be a quick fix. But if you actually want machining, there's several UCSs on the forum that do really well for that. And then we have slab, which would just use the 3/4 slab material, which wouldn't be common on a 5-piece door. So I'm going to put it back to flat. And if this is a drawer front, we can change it to horizontal grain. And so this is the reason why most times we create a flat panel door style and a flat panel drawer front style for 5-piece, because the door fronts are often horizontal grain on the panel, whereas the doors are often vertical. And so that's how you control that. And then we can change the panel inset, and that's how far does the panel dado or go into the stiles and rails. So this can be changed per door, but again, try to get your defaults right so you don't have to be maintaining this for every single door. Now, one other thing before we end this video, you'll notice I changed this to 5-inch stiles and rails, but when I go back, sometimes you'll see these icons don't regenerate. So it did now whenever I went out of the door thing and came back in. But if you ever see the image not updating based on the style of rail that you changed, for example, let's put another rail in here and go back. So it's pretty common for these thumbnails to get out of sync. And as you close Cabinet Vision and reopen it, they will most times catch up. But if you ever want to force a change, you can go to Utilities and hit Generate Icons. And that will just rebuild every door in your catalog and make sure you're getting an accurate thumbnail. So back in design, I kind of skimmed through adding a section. Just like the cabinet section editor, you'll find this pretty familiar. We can add horizontal or vertical splits to make our door have different panels. And so you can actually do multi-splits in both horizontal and vertical areas too. And then obviously we can size these. And one note I'll make on this, you can do this type of sectioning at the door level inside of a job. So don't try to build every single combination. Now your really common ones, like this one for example, the 2-panel split, or maybe you have a 40-60 split. If you have a common type of door that you do build that's 2-panel, great. But you don't necessarily have to build every single configuration, because you can just go into each door while you're in the job and section it a certain way. So again, the only way I would save multiple panels is if it's an actual style that people order for the whole room. So that should give us an idea how we can add a door. And let's quickly just run through adding a drawer front. So I'm going to go back to main, click new, and I'm going to say Myron's 5-piece drawer front. I'm going to do multi-piece, and I'm going to call it a drawer front. And we'll leave all the defaults. And you can see, basically, I think that's literally what that door and drawer front radio button does. It just downsizes this. But I can do the exact same thing. Like if I don't really like quite how small this is. So what I could do is I could go to design, and as long as there's nothing selected, I have access to this design size. So I could make this like 8 inches. So it looks just a little bit more reasonable here from my main screen. And if I don't see this update, I can just go to Utilities and Generate. And now we have a little bit more reasonable looking drawer front. Other than that, this is going to be exactly the same as a door. We're still going to have all the same highlightable stiles and rails, and we can change our panel. I would make this horizontal grain. And if you'll notice, I was highlighted on the FP doors whenever I hit new. So it landed in here with my doors. Now that's okay, we can easily move this. So I can just click and drag it down to drawer front, and now there it is. In this video, we're going to be looking at door associations. I'm going to be giving you 2 examples. The first one will be whenever a door goes above 48 inches tall, it will switch to a double panel door. And the second example will be whenever a door front gets below a certain dimension, it will switch to a 5-piece door with downsized rails, and when it gets even smaller, it will switch to a solid slab. So let's look at this. So with example number 1, I'm going to make the shaker door automatically switch to a shaker 2 panel. So I'm going to right click on the shaker door and copy this and make a shaker 2 panel door. And we'll just go into the designer and create a horizontal split and make it 2 3/4 to match the rest of ours. And just so we can update our thumbnails, we go to utilities and hit generate. Okay, so the go is when I pick shaker door, I want Cabinet Vision to automatically switch to this door style when it goes above 48 inches tall. So to do that, I'm going to go into my main door called shaker, and I'm going to click on door associations. And it brings up this new window. I'm just going to make it a little bigger. And we have width columns across the top and length columns across the bottom. So I'm going to say 999 on the width. And then on the length, I'm going to say 48 and then 999. So that can feel weird to type 999, but basically what I'm saying is this is my maximum size. So for the width, I don't really have any constraints on the width. It doesn't matter what width it is. It's just if it goes above 48, I want to switch to a different door. So what I would do is I would pick my shaker door on the first one, and then if it's above 48, we would pick the shaker 2 panel. So let's go into a job and see how that corresponds. I'll go to cabinet and doors and make sure we choose our shaker door. And let's draw a wall and put a wall cabinet on it. Okay, so this cabinet is 39 inches tall, so it's still using the regular shaker door. If I make it 60, it automatically switches to a double panel. And if I get it a little closer, down to 48, it's still a double panel, but as soon as I go 47, it switches to a single panel. Now, obviously that's a very simple door association. You can see how you could actually build out a lot of different steps that automatically switch. So you could even make it switch to 2 panels wide. And that can all be done in this table because we could put a few more width columns and a few more height columns if we needed to. Okay, so that's the first example. Now let's do a drawer front. So what I want to do is, this is a 2.5 inch 5-piece drawer front. So what I want it to do is I want it to switch to a downsized rail when it gets below, say, 7, and then switch to a solid slab when it gets below, say, 5 inches. So let's copy this, and I'm just going to put DS for downsized, and I'll go into my designer, and I'm going to make it 1.25 inch rails. And we'll update our icons. Okay. Now I already have a slab front, so I'm not going to create the third one, but essentially this will be my main item, and we're going to add logic to say when it goes below 7 inches tall, it switches to this guy. When it goes below 5, it switches to this guy. So we go to our main door, and we go to door associations, and again for width, I don't have a certain size. So I could just type in 999. Now in theory, if it did get below like 7 or 8 inches wide, I probably would want to switch to a solid slab as well. So technically I could put like 5 or 6 or 7 here and then 999, but I don't think I'll ever do one that narrow. Now the lengths on the other hand, this is where I need to put my 3 different sizes. So I'll put 5 for when it switches to slab. Let's do 7.5 for the downsized, and then I'll put my maximum in. Okay, so now if it's 5 or less, I want the slab front. If it's 7.5 or less, I want to get that new downsized. And then if it's under 999 and not meeting one of those other criteria, then I want it to be my normal 5-piece drawer front. Okay, so again, that feels weird, but when you see these 2 examples and you see it working in the job, it'll make sense and give you something to work off when you go to create yours. So back into our job, let's go to doors, and let's choose our shaker door, and now we go to drawer, and let's choose our 5-piece drawer front. Make sure you don't pick the downsized because we want our main one to be the regular 5-piece. And let's go add a wall. I'm going to pull in a base cabinet. Oh, and look at that. I see downsized rails. Now, arguably this one could still have regular ones, but obviously you can see you can change the size of whatever you want. Let me make this 8. Now we have a regular 5-piece storefront. Back to 7, it's downsized. If I go to 4, it's slab. So you can see there's a lot of power in being able to control this. Now the annoying part is, say you wanted this to be a slab and it's 15 inches tall, you would have to actually change the style to do that because the logic is... Now, one thing you will have to note, if you ever want to not follow those global settings, you will have to manually change it. So for example, if you have a 15-inch tall drawer front and you want it to be a slab, there's no way to change the logic just at this cabinet. You would simply just come in and hit change and override the door style to a slab front. And now it wouldn't be following that logic at all anymore. Or the other example is, say you have a drawer front at the top here, and it's coming in at 7 and it's downsized, but on this job, you don't want it to downsize. So in that case, you'd want to go to properties, and here's the tricky bit, because this main 5-piece storefront has the association on it. So even if I try to override this, it's simply going to look back to the association and see that it needs to downsize. So if you want, technically if you want control of being able to put it back to a 5-piece, you really should create a normal 5-piece with an association and one without. Just like this situation I mentioned, where it's trying to downsize and you want to override it. With what I have in my catalog right now, there's no way for me to do a regular 5-piece. Now I could go into section and try to change that back to 2.5, but my report would still read out that this is a downsized rail. So a few little quirks to get around with associated doors, but overall, if you make a pretty across-the-board rule of where and when it switches, associations can be a major time saver. If you find yourself job by job switching at sometimes at 8 inches, sometimes at 7, sometimes at 6, you might be better off just manually overriding the door style rather than relying on associations, because sometimes the automation can be more annoying than it helps if you're doing a lot of custom switching. So hopefully those two scenarios give you an understanding of how door associations can be used. And like I said, until when I first saw this new table, it was very confusing. But when I started entering the 999 maximum size, it made things a lot easier. Because once you see that basically it's this or less, it makes more sense. And when you can see my two examples here, it makes it easy for you to replicate. But my advice would be careful how in-depth you go with these and make sure you have a way for the user to get back to a certain door style if they need to. In this video, we're going to be creating some visual door profiles. And this is not talking about one-piece MDF routed doors. Instead, we're going to be talking about just the visual profiles such as outside edges, inside edges, or panel profiles. So CabinetVision does come with a few profiles, but just like everything else, we want to clear those out and create profiles that are specific to our door supplier. So that means getting the name and ideally also a decent shape. It doesn't have to be perfect because we're not machining it, but visually it's nice if it's a decent representation of the actual profile. So I'm going to click into profile and I'm going to start by creating an outside edge. So just like this, you can see there's a 1/4 inch radius. So I want to just make a very simple, say a 16th radius or a 16th roundover. So I'll just click new and notice it comes in as 1 inch by 3 inch. If I would start a job right now with this new outside edge, the door would look like it's 3 inches thick because this profile would try to apply. So the first thing I want to do is downsize this. I'm going to grab that dash line and pull it down by 2 1/4. And now we have a nice reference point here. And now our box is 3/4 height. And if I go look at that 1/4 inch radius again and go to edit, you can see the reference point is actually at the top. So the reference point you'll note is in green, the other dots are going to be yellow. So for us, when I make my, looks like I didn't name it yet, just new outside edge. So I'm going to call this 1/16th roundover. And I want to put my reference point up here. See how it's currently at the bottom? So I just click reference and move it to the top. Now that's going to be very important for the outside edge. And I really don't need it to be this wide. You know, it's 1 inch wide, but if I'm only doing a 16th roundover, I mean, 1/8 would be plenty, and technically 16th would be enough. So I'm going to highlight the top line and just grab this dot and move it back in the direction I want to go. and I'm going to type in 16th. And then same thing down here, just click the line, grab the dot, and pull it back. There we go. Now we need to put a radius on this corner. So I'm going to grab my join tool and do the fillet, and I'll type in 1/16. And I click my first line and then my second line. And there we got a nice 16th roundover. I can hit check to make sure everything's closed, and then I can just go back. So you can see I don't really need to save it any bigger. It only needs to be as wide as the profile itself. There's no reason to put a 3/4 inch profile if it's only going to take up a 16th. Alright, let's do another example. Let's go to inside edge and let's create a small bevel. Now there's already a bevel in here, and their stock profiles include the shaping for the pano inset. I'm not even going to include that because I don't need those extra lines. But I do want to just do a simple bevel. So I'm going to click new, and I'm going to call this bevel 1/8. And I'm just giving it random names. Obviously you want to match it to your door supplier. And same thing, it came in 1 inch by 3/8, or 1 inch by 3. So the first thing I want to do is get my box the right size. So I'll just grab this dash line and pull it down 2 1/4, and I'm left with 3/4. And then if I'm doing an 1/8 inch bevel, really all I need this to be is an 1/8 inch wide. So I'm just going to drag this line back by 7/8. And so you can see this time I used the little dash line to pull it over. Last time I clicked each line and moved the dots. So either way, depends on the situation. One may be a little easier than the other, but they both work. Okay, and then just like this one, I assume the reference point needs to be at the top. I'll just go compare one of the others just to make sure. Yep, the reference point is at the top. So I'll go back to my bevel, and I want to move the reference to the top. And this time, instead of grabbing the roundover tool, I'm going to grab the chamfer tool and do 0.125, and I click the top line and the bottom line. Now, one thing you will notice is if I make it an 1/8 chamfer, it actually makes, let me put it on 3 decimals so we can see, it actually makes the line itself an 1/8 inch, whereas you might have wanted the actual distance to where the bevel starts to be an 1/8. And if that's the case, you might want to do this a slightly different way. Let me just join this back up. Instead of the fillet or the chamfer, I can do connect, click the first line and the second line, and it just connects them back up. So if I wanted to make a bevel that started exactly at an 1/8, what I would do is use the offset tool, move it down an 1/8, and then just draw a line. And that would essentially be the same thing as the chamfer, but it's helping me set the line length if you wanted it to reference from that point. So there's a couple different ways to do things, and mainly sometimes you have to just use the offset and draw lines in order to be able to set points to snap to. And so some shapes are easy to draw and some of them are more difficult. But we can see our reference point is in the right place and all the lines turn green when I hit check, so we're good to go. So let's go take a look at these two profiles in a job, and then I'm going to do a little bit more complex one and show you a few strategies with drawing those. I'm going to go into my door catalog and go find my shaker door. I'm going to go to profile filter, outside edges, and I'm going to pull 16th roundover. And I'm doing this only if that's the only thing I wanted to show. So like I haven't tested any of these other profiles. I'm going to say for now this is the only profile I want available. And then the inside edge, same thing. I'm going to say bevel 1/8 is the only thing that should be allowed to work. Okay, let's start a new job and look at these profiles. So you'll notice this is the only thing in my list. And let's go look at this in a job. So we'll pull a wall cabinet out. And if we zoom in, you can see I have my nice little radius and I have my nice little bevel. And so if you're 3D rendering, this is very important because it really just makes your doors look a lot more realistic when they have profiles. Even if you're not rendering, it's nice from the end and plan view to be able to kind of see what the door is doing and how big the stiles and rails can be. So there's a lot of benefits to actually drawing these things correctly. Like I mentioned, we're not machining these profiles, so they don't technically have to be 100% accurate. As long as they give a good visual representation, that's really what we're after. So now let's go back and draw a little bit more difficult profile. So I Googled for a door company and found Keystone Wood Specialties. Not necessarily recommending them, this is just where I landed that showed a few of their profiles. So some of these are going to be very easy to draw, and others it's going to be hard to get an idea exactly what we're looking for. So let's take a look at this CH2. It doesn't look super complex, but you can see there's 2 little bends and 2 little breaks. So if you're just trying to eyeball this side by side, it's a little bit tricky to make this come out. So I want to show you how I do this. Now, best case scenario is they have DXF files, you can import them and the points are perfect. But the times that that's actually happened is slim to none. So the other option we have is we can just take a snip or an image and then draw CAD lines over top of the image. And that's what I find myself doing most of the time. So I'm going to use Snagit. And I'm just going to capture an image. And I want to draw it pretty close to the lines. It doesn't really matter if it's perfect, but just no reason to get more than you need. And then let's just save this to my downloads folder. I'll just call it Profile 1. Now, if you don't have Snagit, you can do the same thing with Snip and Sketch. Just grab your snipping tool, hit New, and draw a box around it. Same exact idea. I like Snagit for my use because it's basically Photoshop and a snipping tool all in one, but I'm not here to talk about Snagit right now. So let's go back into Camera Vision and go to Profile. So this is an outside edge, and it's called CH-2. So I'm going to go to my outside edge category, create a new one, CH-2, and the first thing I want to do is I want to get my height right. So I'm going to set it to 3/4. The height is correct. And now here are the 2 ways we can trace over images. So like I mentioned, best case scenario is your door company has a DXF that's actually usable. Because sometimes they'll send you a DXF and there's so many different layers and points that it's almost easier to start from scratch. So like I said, most times I actually end up using the image import and then just tracing over that. So let's look at how this might work. I'm going to click on image and load in Profile 1. And I'm just going to kind of set it beside this. Now, again, I want to mention that these are visual profiles. It's okay if I'm off a tiny bit, but I want to get as close as I can. So what I like to do is just kind of put it halfway over the image here, and I want to size this thing so it's as close as I can get it. So just kind of want my blue line right on the center of that dark line, pretty close. Again, I have a decent tolerance here. I'm okay if it's off a 64th or something. Now I want this line to be all the way up here. And make sure you grab by the corner. Do not grab by the sides or it will just stretch the image. So I'm going to grab this corner and just move it back. And you have to click off to see where it's at. And it looks like I'm a little too big. And it might have been down just a little bit too much. So let's just make it just a little bit bigger. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. Now I need to get my box to fit this. And rather than trying to move my image again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to offset this line and get it right there. And then we can just get the trim delete and get rid of these extra lines. And now I'm ready to start tracing my image. So what I'll do is I'll just keep using the offset tool to give me some helpful snap points. So, I need one there. I'll also need one right here. And I'll offset from here and grab this line. And now this one's kind of tricky because you see there's 2 breaks here. So I might just grab one line and just see if I can kind of find a middle point here. It's kind of hard to tell, but let me start here and then possibly break it around there. I might move this up just a little bit. Okay, let's try that. Now what I want to do is I want to bend this line down and this one up. So right now this is recognizing as one segment. So I'm going to go to trim break. And if I click on this line, it puts an endpoint there and it now broke that line. So now when I select it, it's just this segment. And then I can go to bend and I'll just move this down. And so you can see I'm not perfect there. So at this point I might try again and move this line a little higher or get a little closer, or I might say, you know what, that's going to be close enough for what I'm doing. And so if I think it's close enough, I'll just get my trim delete tool and just clean everything else up around it. And this is important because I can't save a shape as long as it has interior parts. If I hit check, it's going to say too many shapes. So it's important that we get trim delete and get all these internal lines cleared out. So now I hit check, it turns green. And I want my reference point to be, I want it to be here, but if you'll notice, my profile is actually backwards. And what I mean by that is if I save this, my reference point is in the top right, whereas if I look at this outside edge, it's going the other way. So that's okay because my image was backwards. I could have mirrored the image before I imported it, but there's an easy enough way to flip this. So I'm going to go back into edit, highlight my entire box, and go to transform and mirror it. Now I want to move my reference point over to this side. Okay, so what I need to do is mirror this shape so that it's facing the other direction. So I'm going to go to Edit, select everything, and I'm going to go to Transform and Mirror. And now if I check the shape, okay, so I want to draw a CH2. So instead of relying on the DXF from the door supplier, I'm going to show you an easy way to do it using Image. So I'm going to use Snagit. You can also use the built-in Windows snipping tool if you do not have Snagit. So I'm going to go to my Snagit shortcut and Capture. And I want to just draw a nice little box the size of my profile. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you don't want a whole lot of extra stuff on your image. Okay, and I'm going to save this as Profile 1. And let's go into Cabinet Vision and start creating. So I'm going to go into Outside Edges and do New. And this is called CH2. And by default, it makes it 1 inch by 3 inches tall. So first things first, let's size this thing down to 3/4. Okay, so you can see my thickness came in as 1 inch and my height by 3 inches. So the first thing I need to do is downsize the height down to 3/4. So it's currently 3 inches. I'm going to offset by 2 1/4. And now we have our height correct. And one thing I want to point out, notice that these profiles are all facing to the right. Now, when I come in to import my image, I'm going to go to Insert and Insert My Images, and you'll see that this profile is actually backwards. Now, I could draw this and then highlight everything and select Mirror, but the Mirror option can be a little finicky. So if you start having a lot of arcs and radiuses, the Mirror doesn't always work perfectly. So for myself, I'm going to fix this image by mirroring it before I ever import the image. So to mirror my image before I import it, I'm going to go to my File Explorer and go to Downloads. And I'm going to right click on my Profile 1 and open with Paint. Now I could do this inside of Snagit, but I'm going to do it in Paint since everybody has Paint. And just without selecting anything, I'm going to go to Image and flip horizontal. Now you can see that flips that, and then I can just go to Save. And you can do a Save As if you want to keep the original. Now I can go back to my CH2 and I can edit it and insert image. And now we're going to be drawing it the correct way. So now we don't have to rely on Cabinet Vision's mirror to accurately put all our points in the right place after drawing it. And I would much prefer doing this rather than, like I said, wasting time and then the mirror not working. So how I like to handle this is I like to just put the image about halfway across my blue lines. That way I can see a little bit of both. And then I just kind of move this until I get it lined up. And sometimes moving it, it's hard to move it in little stretches. So sometimes I'll actually just resize it. I feel like I can do a little bit tinier increments. But we want to get the black line or the image line centered on our blue line, which that's a pretty good job there. Again, I'm okay if it's off a 64th or, a tiny bit, because this is a visual profile. Now this isn't too far, but I can get that closer. So I'm going to grab the corner. Do not grab these side handles or it just stretches the image, which is bad. So we always want to, if you are resizing it, always grab a corner. And then just go in little increments until you're happy with how that's centering. So I'm going to go just a little bit bigger. Okay, so that's pretty good. I'm accurately scaling this image to 1 inch. Now, without worrying about this line out here, I'm going to start making some offsets to build this profile. So I'm going to offset from the top and just drop a line right on here. And I'm going to offset here and offset all the way back to here. So I want to get my blue lines in as many helpful places as I can. So now this profile is a little bit tricky, like I said, because it has the two bends. Like this one bends out and then in here it bends in. So what I would probably try to do, let me actually do one more offset. Let me get this guy right at the edge of that profile. Let me delete that and try that again. Sometimes it wants to snap to the grid so you can't place it exactly where you want to. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to draw a line and try to find the start of that radius. And it's a little bit hard to tell because I got a low quality image and it's just kind of hard to see what's going on, but I'm going to just kind of snap it right there. And then what I want to do is offset a line to where I think this bend is happening. So I'm going to do it about right there. And now I want to bend this line. But you can see if I highlight it, it's recognizing as one straight segment. So if I would bend it, it would bend this whole line. So I want to use a little tool called Trim Break. Click on the line. Now if I go back to select, now you see it recognizes as two separate lines. So now I can take my bend tool, pull this guy in, and pull this guy out. And again, this is a visual profile, so If you're not totally happy with how this came out, you can just delete those 2 lines and try that again, maybe adjust your segment. But as long as you get it visually close, it's not going to make a huge difference. So now the next step is I can't have all these lines on my profile. If I hit check, it's going to say too many shapes. They need 1 perimeter outline. So I'm going to get my trim delete tool out and start clearing up all these leftover lines. Just make sure you don't delete something you need. Oh, that's annoying. For whatever reason, that trim delete deleted my actual arc, but that's okay. I can snap him back in there. Now let's try the trim delete again. So I don't have a good explanation for why sometimes that doesn't work, but arcs can definitely be weird. And then let's just trim these guys out of here. And again, I just lost my line. There's something funky going on with that guy, but I guess I'll just keep piecing him in. Okay, now if I hit check, I get a green line, and the last step that I need to do is go to reference and put this guy right at the top. Okay, let's go check out this CH2. So I'm gonna go into my door, find my shaker door, go to profile filter, outside edge, and CH2. And remember, you wouldn't have to, remember if nothing is selected, all the profiles work. In this example, I've just been pulling over the relevant image, but this time I'm gonna leave it as none selected. That way you can see how it looks when I start a job. So we're gonna go to cabinet. With our shaker door selected, we're going to choose CH2. And again, you can see that entire list is being loaded now. Okay, brilliant. So even though that is not a perfect drawing, it is so close that it will look perfect visually. No one's ever going to know the difference that it might be off a tiny bit because we traced the image. And so that's how, if you're doing outsourced 5-piece doors, that's how I would recommend drawing your profiles. Now, if you don't care about the visual at all, you could just create new profiles, make them blocks, and just give them the right name. But I think it's worth spending the extra minute or 2, maybe 5 minutes, to draw the profiles, because I think there's a lot of value in being able to see that on the job. And if you hit enhance, you can get a little bit clearer of an image. So that is how we can start importing our visual profiles. And like I said, once I have my profiles in place, I would actually go and delete the rest of the outside profiles just by highlighting it and hitting delete. Because again, if I ever decided to do something like this, I would rather recreate it anyways. It's the chance of actually using this exact shape is pretty slim, and it's actually really easy to create profiles. So that is how we do our door profiles, and it's the same exact process for our raised panel profiles, outside edges and inside edges.